Hey guys, welcome back to the Psalms God YouTube channel. This is another Breakfast in a Bible episode, and today instead of zeroing in on one particular lady in the Bible, we are going to talk about a couple of them, actually quite a few women in the Bible, and we're going to talk about being where we're supposed to be. This is a topic that I think has become very near and dear to my heart since probably my late 20s. It started at a conversation. I was having a potluck at my house with some young adults from church. And as those potlucks often ended up into the topic of singleness, it did. I feel like almost every potluck I went to, at some point, the topic of singleness came up. And I get it because there are a lot of single women in the church. I being one of them. I was one of them then, and I'm still one of them now, many years later. And, there weren't many men. So, the potlucks were a place for people to just sit down and talk. And amongst the men that were there, most of the time they were married men. So it was also a place where you could get feedback, opinions, etc., etc. So that's why it generally ended up going into that direction. And at this particular potluck that I'm thinking of, one of the girls that I was there with said something like, if we keep going to work, home, and church, and that's all we do, we'll never find spouses. And I've noticed since then that that is a general theme that you'll hear in singles ministries. You will hear that if you look online and you hear people who are like dating coaches or experts or whatever. That is just a general consensus that people have come to. Now, being a logician and a person with a degree in the STEM field and following logical trains of thought, this actually sounds right. Yeah, okay. Like, work is a place where you could potentially get an HR violation if someone, doesn't appreciate you flirting with them, or, things, you two people not connected on the same page. That can go real bad real quick, and I need my job to pay my bills. Same thing, a lot of jobs have clauses about not dating your coworkers. It's a lot of times against company policy. It can get hairy. Also, if you date one of your coworkers and it doesn't pan out to be a happily ever after, then one of you probably wants to find a new job, which again, like, I need my job to pay my bills. So finding a spouse at work can be a little bit more tricky. It happens. The first company I ever worked for, there were a lot of married couples who met at the job there. My own parents met at their job. Well, technically they went to school together, but they didn't actually talk to each other until they worked together. And that's how they met. They've been married for like 40 some years. So it's not that you can't meet someone at your job. It's a little bit more difficult to navigate, particularly depending on the job that you have. Now, of course, at home, I live by myself. There's such a small percentage of chance that I'll meet somebody just sitting at my house. Now, there have been a couple of times. I live in a new place. I recently moved, so I've had neighbors come over. So it's possible that, one of my neighbors could be the one. It's also possible that you could end up meeting, I don't know, the food delivery person, the UPS guy, the guy who comes to fix the plumbing, or the electrician. You never know. It's not possible. Not possible. But these types of scenarios don't happen all day, every day, and really, I hope nothing breaks because I don't want to have to pay for an electrician or a plumber or anybody to come to the house. So, just the likelihood there is also kind of slim. And of course, if you attend a physical building, church body, the number of men there is very slim, as was at this potluck where we were having this discussion. There were probably like 30 women and like 2 single men. So, and when you think about it logically, it kind of makes sense. And it's also that adage of doing the same thing over and over again is insanity, right? It hasn't been working for the past 30 some years. What makes us think that if we continue to do that, then suddenly it will work. But the believer in me is like, nah, y'all got that twisted. We serve a God of miracles. I mean, we're talking about the man who, like, he told Sarah she was going to have a baby, and she's like 80, 90 years old, and she had a baby. We talking about post-menopausal Sarah having a baby. We talking about Mary having a baby, and she never even had sex. We talking about someone who was raising people from the dead, who, was getting people out of fiery furnaces and saving them from lions' dens. And I mean, if he could do all that, yeah, he can definitely drop a man off at my door while I'm at home, or bring the man to church when I go to church, or have him somehow show up at my job. It's possible. All things are possible with the Most High. But again, when we get into these topics, there's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of I think, I feel, etc., etc. And the biggest thing I've learned in my journey is that it's not about what I think or what I feel. It's about what God said. So, just as Jesus confronted Satan scripture for scripture in Matthew 4, I decided we was going to look into the Bible and see how the women of the Bible found their husbands and see what they did and did not do to answer this question. So let's start with Eve, the first woman. Eve was created when God saw that Adam was lonely. Adam needed a companion. God created Eve to be the companion. God created Eve. He put her in the garden where Adam was, and then they became a married couple. Now, this example, I feel like it's a kind of a cheat example because it's so simplistic. They were the only two people on the planet. It's not like Adam had another choice. And also, we know God created Eve specifically for Adam. Like, it was just like a perfect environment. There was no sin involved. So there was no like insecurity. There was no self-consciousness. Like, a lot of the hurdles that we face today didn't exist at that time. But this was the prototype. This was the idea. This was the perfect scenario. And the perfect scenario is that Adam was in the garden doing what God told him to do, which was to name all of the creatures. And Eve went where God told her to go. God put her in the garden and she was there. Eve wasn't wandering around looking for Adam. Adam wasn't wandering around looking for Eve. They just went where God told them, and behold, they were together. But this pattern, despite being very simplistic and occurring, during the time of perfection, it actually holds throughout pretty much all of the women we're going to talk about today. So the next couple that we meet where we actually see how they met is Rebecca and Isaac. So in Genesis 24, Abraham, who is Isaac's father, decides that it's time for Isaac to get married. Isaac has no say in this. This is not, hey, Isaac, what do you think? How do you feel about it? Isaac wasn't like, yo, I'm looking for a wife. I think it's time for me to settle down. Isaac was minding his own business. He was trying to cope with the loss of his mom. And Abraham was over here with his servant cooking up a plan of how to get Isaac a wife. So Abraham sends his servant back to the land of Ur to find a wife for Isaac. And the servant gets to Ur and it's like, how am I going to figure out which woman to pick? How do I know? Right? This is the question everybody's asking. How do we know who is the right person? So he says a prayer to God, and he does one of those things where he's like, this is what I expect to happen. Have the woman that is right do these things, and I will know that that's who I'm going to pick. And behold, Rebecca shows up and does the things that he has expected, and that's how Rebecca is chosen. Now, what is it that Rebecca does to get chosen? Rebecca is doing her chores. Okay, Rebecca is watering the flock, her family's flock at the well. This is something she'd have had to do every day. I know. As a farm girl who grew up in the country, when I used to come home from school, I would go down to the barn and water the cows, make sure they had water, give the horse a cup of feed. There's a list of things you have to do for the animals when you live in an agrarian society. So this is what she's doing. I don't know if, her and Laban took turns. I don't know. But it was her time to take the flock to get water. So that's what she did. She went, and when she got there, she saw this stranger, and she was nice to him. And she was like, hey, do you want some water? While I'm getting water for the sheep or the cows or the goats or whatever she had, would you like some water too? And behold, he was like, yep, that's exactly what I expected to happen. So, and she invited him back to eat with them. And he was like, yep, I'm here looking for a wife for my master's son. Would you like to be her? And that is how Rebecca ended up being the wife of Isaac. She was going about her day-to-day routine, her basic chores, the things that she was supposed to do. She did not go out of her normal routine. Okay, Rebecca wasn't like, where are all the cute men? Oh, they're at the gym. Let me go invest in a gym membership when I don't actually have any reason to go to the gym, so that I can meet a guy at the gym. Like, that's not what she did. She didn't say, let me go to the bars every weekend. That's not how she did it. She was doing her normal routine. Rachel meets Jacob in almost the same exact fashion. She's out feeding the flock, and Jacob stops to help her. Jacob is actually looking for this family, though, because this is still, Rachel is the daughter of Laban, who is Rebecca's brother. So there's, relationship here. And he's actually looking for this family to go live with them because he has made his brother angry, and he's basically fleeing for his life. So in the back of his head, maybe there was some, Jacob is like, I'm going to go find a wife while I'm out here. But definitely primary motivation for Jacob going into this land is, I'm trying to not die, right? And Rachel is going about her day-to-day life. Rachel is not going to the well like, maybe I'll meet a cute young suitor at the well. She's just doing what she has to do, and she meets Jacob, and he falls in love with her. We know he has to work 7 years. He ends up married to Leah instead, but the only reason Leah knows who Jacob is because Rachel met him at the well. Leah also did not go out of the way to try to meet Jacob, and his other 2 wives, Zilpah and Bilhah, who were the handmaids for Rachel and Leah, again, they didn't go out of their way to meet Jacob either. Bonus is that in Exodus, we see this same well story play out with Moses and his wife Zipporah. When Moses gets to Midian, Zipporah and her sisters are trying to get water from the well as well, and some men are hassling them, and Moses steps in and is like, yo, let these girls do what they gotta do. He helps them. And when they go back and tell their father what happened, their father is like, yo, invite him to come have dinner. So they go back, and Moses ends up married to the oldest daughter, Zipporah. So again, people are just doing what they're just where they are supposed to be and doing their normal day-to-day routines, being good people, and that's how they have met their spouse. Now, when you step off from Rachel, you get out of Genesis and you start getting later into the Old Testament, you come to Ruth. And Ruth is the woman people love to talk about in a singles ministry. Wait on your Boaz, right? And I guess Ruth is probably the most forward woman in terms of dating in the Bible. Ruth shot her shot, okay? Ruth went to the party, slept at Boaz's feet, and was like, are you going to marry me or what? Right? Like, probably the most forward woman that we're going to talk about in this list. But if you actually look at the whole of the story, Ruth didn't actually go that far out of her way either. So Ruth was married. We don't know how she met her first husband, but she was married and her husband died. And they basically become a family of widows. Her father-in-law is dead. Her brother-in-law is dead. So you have Naomi, who is her mother-in-law, Ruth, and her sister-in-law that was married to Ruth's husband's brother. They're all widowed now, and they don't have any kids. And it's like, what do we do now, right? So both women offer to go back to Israel with Naomi. And Naomi's like, why would you do that? I don't have any more sons. I'm not going to have any more sons. Even if I had sons, were you going to wait until they become grown? You should go back to your people. You should live your life, etc., etc. And the one girl is like, all right, I'm going back. And she goes back to her people. But Ruth is like, no, I'm sticking with you. You are my family. Wherever you go, I'm going to go. whoever you believe in, that's what I'm going to believe in. If you die, I'm going to die. Like, we're sticking together. So Ruth follows Naomi from her home back into Israel, where she becomes a stranger. This is like if I had married somebody who was like, say, like from Mexico, and I become a widow, and instead of staying here in the United States where I grew up and where my family is, I go back with my mother-in-law to Mexico to live the rest of my life, right? You have a culture change. You may or may not have language changes, all kinds of things. But this is what Ruth is doing. She's saying she's going to stick with her family, her new family. And when Ruth and Naomi get to Israel, they're essentially destitute because that's how it was for women who weren't married. So they have to eat somehow. And one of the laws in the Old Testament was that farmers or people who had property were not supposed to clean the bushes. It's actually bad for the plants. Again, being a farmer actually helps you understand the Bible so much more. But they weren't supposed to take every single berry off the bush or every single bean or carrot or whatever they were planting. They weren't supposed to take it all. They were supposed to leave something. And the people who had nothing, the homeless, the poor, the widows, the orphans, etc., they would come and pick up the leftovers for themselves. So this is what Ruth was doing. She was going and gleaning fields to get food for her and Naomi. She had to do that. Whether Boaz had existed or not, she was going to have to go in the field somewhere and get some food. But when she started doing this, Naomi realizes that Boaz is one of these people whom she can go to and glean his field, and that Boaz is a near kinsman. So Naomi is like, yo, yes, go there, and, that's who we're going to try to set y'all up because he's a near kinsman and he has an obligation to the family. And again, this is a lot more about survival than I'm going to go be cute and go out of my way to be at this place or that place in the hopes that I'm going to meet somebody. Ruth had to go to a field to glean. Like, this was a chore. This is basically her going to work because she has to eat. So she just happens to also meet Boaz here. And when she does end up getting dressed up and shooting her shot, this is after she's already met him because she's been in the field, gleaning the field. And that's where she ends up, saying like, are you going to fulfill your role as near kinsman, et cetera, et cetera. But even though she is a little bit more bold and there is a little more strategy in like, I'm going to go to this particular field over that field because there's a higher probability that I will get married at this field than that field. She's still not really going out of her way. It's not like she's doing something out of the ordinary or something outside of what God has planned for her. It's just that she's more strategic about it. So this would be like, maybe you should go to a church that has younger people at it as opposed to going to the old people church. You're more likely to meet somebody or going to like a church with a larger population. You're more likely to meet somebody. There's more people to meet, right? That's kind of along the lines of it. It's not, well, I can't just go to church and work and home. I got to go over here to this random place that I would not normally go to meet somebody. And the last person that I want to talk about today is Esther. Now, Esther is an interesting case because Esther's story does not fit with anything we're taught as Christian women, okay? First of all, Esther married the king, all right? She did above and beyond. She didn't marry the average Joe that was walking around next door. She didn't marry the boy next door. She married the king of Persia, which is kind of a big deal. But also, her story reads kind of like The Bachelor. Like, the king just went and rounded up some virgins and was like, I'm going to pick one to marry. And if we're being honest, this probably wasn't a PG-13 type of thing. Like, I'm pretty sure he didn't just go in the room and be like, that one is pretty. I like her smile. I'm gonna marry her. I'm pretty sure some things happened before he chose. Like, pretty sure that all the women who met him left not virgins. You don't put it like that, okay? I think I think some stuff was going on, okay? So Esther is, on top of that, Esther was told to hide her identity, which I also find interesting. This is one of those things, aside, I have to point this out. This is one of those tiny, minute details in the Bible that people skip over, but there's so much information in it, okay? So, like, imagine if I went to England and, we're in the olden days where people still do things like this, and I'm going to meet the King of England or the Prince of England, and I'm trying to hide my ethnic identity to, fit in. Like, I'm pretty sure the people in England would realize that I am a black woman. I don't think I would be able to hide that. So the fact that Esther was able to just not say that she's Jewish says something about how the Persians looked, or how the people that were in Persia looked, versus how the Jews looked. Like, they all looked the same. I think, I think that the ancient Israelites were a bit of a melting pot, because we also see they looked like the Egyptians. They are often confused for them. But I think, again, they were all related in some way, form, or another. You have the Ishmaelites and there were lots of other Semitic peoples that still descend from Shem. They looked alike. They didn't stand out. Like, she had to blend in with at least one or two other cultural groups that were in Persia for her to be able to just not say she was Jewish. But it also means that her behavior had to have matched those two. Like, for instance, here in the United States, where, religious wise, you don't have, there are Jewish people, there are Muslims, there are Christians, there are atheists, but Christianity makes up the predominant religious group in the United States. And within Christianity, most people eat whatever they want to. Whether that's right or wrong is a topic for a totally different time. But if you were Jewish or Muslim in the United States and you're not eating pork, you're not eating shellfish, things like that, that would be out of the norm. So the moment, like, for instance, when I stopped eating pork, people started asking me if I was Muslim. They're like, oh, are you Muslim now? No, right? Like, it's very much like something that sparks people's attention. So, I mean, obviously right now, if you were in the Middle East, like, for instance, if you were in Israel, both the Israelis and, the Palestinians, the Arab population there, most of them probably all don't eat pork, because you would have Muslims and you would have Jews. And even amongst the Christians that are there would have cultural ties to, either Arab culture and Islam, or Jewish culture and Judaism. So it really wouldn't matter if you were like, no, I don't eat pork. People wouldn't necessarily be like, oh, you must be Jewish or you must be Muslim or whatever, because both groups would say that. But in Persia, I'm not really sure what the custom of the day was. So for Esther, like how you dress, how you talk, like your prayer regimen, like how you, like who you pray to, like what was she doing that also hid her religious identity from the people and the king, right? Like, that's one of those things where I'm like, Esther, what was Esther actually doing? Like, there's some questions and there's a little detail, but it brings up a lot of questions about, like, what happened leading up to this marriage between Esther and the king of Persia. We also know that this was not an equally yoked marriage, because the king of Persia was not worshiping the Most High God. If he was, he would not have issued the decree to kill all of the Jews, right? We know that this may not have been the ideal marriage that we're seeking out as believers today. However, We also know that this was definitely part of God's plan, because the whole point of the book of Esther is that she was born for such a time as this. Esther goes in and she marries the king, and when all of this stuff happens and the plot to overthrow or to kill all of the Jews comes out, it is Esther who has to save the day. Esther's the only one who can go to the king and stop all of this madness from happening, and that's what she does. Esther is exactly where God wanted her to be. Whether she plotted to get into this group of women that were shown to the king, or whether she was kidnapped and forced into this against her will, she still was following the path that God had set before her, because the whole point was that she was supposed to be there to approach the king to stop him from allowing death to befall the people. So the one thing that I've seen through all of these women finding their husbands is that they're not actually finding, they're not looking, they're not seeking, they're not going out of their way to find a husband. They are doing what God told them to do. They're living life as they're supposed to. And so with that being said, like, yeah, being a hermit is probably not going to move things around super speedy. I say that as a self-proclaimed hermit. But if you are doing the things that God is telling you to do, and you're maintaining your life the way you're supposed to, you're going out, you're doing things that you would normally do. Maybe you have a passion for helping the needy, so you go out and you feed the homeless, and you are working with Habitat for Humanity, or you are doing social work in communities that need help and things like that. Then yeah, maybe you're going to find your person there, because you're where God is pointing you. If you are an artist and you spend all of your time in art stores doing artsy things, maybe that's where you're going to find your person. Or if you are like me, I like to read. I'm usually in a park somewhere reading a book. Maybe I'll find somebody in the park while I'm reading a book. Not anytime soon, because I'm not going to the park in this cold weather. I am a summer person. I'm a summer and spring person. I am about to hibernate for the winter. But my point is, none of these women sat down and got with their girlfriends and was like, where are the men folk? Oh, the men folk are at the football games. I don't like football, but I'm going to start going to the football games because that's where I'm going to meet a man, right? That's not how that was going in the Bible. They were doing what they were called to do and doing their normal daily routines and being good people. That's a key right there. Being good people. And God brought them a spouse. So the next time somebody tells you that God can't bring a man to your door, God is a God of miracles. Okay. It is possible. When, how, everything, it's a little blurry. I'm also single, so take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. But I definitely believe that if you are following him and you are doing what he has told you to do, then you will be in the right place at the right time. Whenever it's supposed to happen, it will happen. And it will happen the way that he wants it to happen. So that is our breakfast and Bible for today. And I hope that these ladies brought smiles to your face. Let me know in the comments if you have any ideas, topics, particular women that you want to talk about in the next episode. And I will see you guys soon. Bye.